This machine is called a bandsaw. Now this machine, it happens to be a 14-inch bandsaw, meaning its diameter of the wheel is 14, but any size of bandsaw, any maker, these rules should apply to all of them. The way that it works is it has a 14-inch diameter wheel on the top and the bottom, and a long continuous blade wraps around both, and the wheels just continue spinning, and the cutting is happening here, of course, where the blade is. Now the blade is just high centered on these two wheels. There's a high center here, and I can adjust the blade movement a little bit, but once it's in the middle, we just keep it running like that, and we can use it to cut, which means there's very little mechanically holding the blade in, so it's easy to pull off, and we'll talk more about that later. These should stay shut throughout the operation, of course. The only adjustment that you'll be able to make is on the guard right here. This is the bed, the guard, the blade, the on-off switch. On all bandsaws, there's a way to change the height of this guard. We don't want so much open blade here that I might be able to get my hand in there. Some of them are on the side. In this case, it's in the back. Now hold on to it so it doesn't slam down. I just loosen, and that loosens this guard, and I can put my board underneath it, lay it on top, and then lift it about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. In other words, my smallest finger cannot squeeze between the board and the guard. Now I'm ready to cut. This is free, and I can still see what I'm doing without squeezing my fingers into the sides or into the front. Let's talk a little bit about technique, and we'll talk about safety depending on which cuts you're making. First thing is, make sure to line up the cut with the blade. So if I take a straight edge, this blade only cuts straight. Now, of course, I can cut curvy lines, but that's me moving the board, making it tangent or in the same direction as this blade, so it only cuts this way. In other words, don't start cutting that direction. If the line isn't aiming directly at the blade, it'll just cut straight. It'll just cut the direction there. So line it up straight, then begin your cut. Second, on a cut like this, which one of these two do you make first? Now, I said before that the blade is only high-centered into the machine. So the blade is running around on a high-centered wheel. It's very easy to pull that blade off. So by pulling out a board, making a cut, and then having to pull it back out, you're putting tension and pressure on the blade to come off the wheel. So between the two, you always want to make the short cut first. Make this cut. Then I can back out of that easily and safely, then make your longer cut. The piece falls out, and now I'm not forced to back out of it. Always reach around to get it from the back. If I'm making a long, curvy cut, and for whatever reason I have to stop and back out, if it's curvy especially, but if it's a long cut, turn the machine off. Then I can pull this all I want, and I'm not actually pulling it out of the wheels. So any long cuts you got to back out of, shut off the machine, let it stop. For cutting circular things, you still have the same issue. Let's say I'm trying to get rid of this center part here. Now this is a fairly big curve. It'll make it without squeezing the blade. The most common accidents happen when you're cutting a sharp curve without relief cuts. Now I shouldn't need them on this big one, but I wanted to talk about aligning still. I still have my ruler here, and it doesn't do any good. You know, if I'm cutting this way, my ruler is telling me I'm going to cut straight across and leave a big bulk of wood here. We want to cut a little closer to that line, so you want to turn it so it's tangent to the edge. Now inside, of course, but tangent. So as you're cutting, take your time and cut so this line is pointed straight. And you've got to continue turning while cutting forward. So I don't want to cut, stop, turn. As soon as I turn and I'm not moving forward, I'm putting tension on the blade. That's when it's going to break. So if you get it wrong, back up a little. Start cutting again, and now I can turn earlier. Turn through it. See, if I make a mistake, I'm getting too far off. Back up a hair. And nibble a little more away. There we go. Notice I'm also not putting my hand in line with the blade. I have my hands to the side. So I'm cutting out. Now on sharp corners, I need to make relief cuts. So I simply cut all the way in, just shy of the line, and we make a series of cuts. Now when I go and cut this out, I take pieces out. So there's one piece. Cutting out these little pieces until you get them all. Now the cut itself is fairly jagged, and that's okay. There's just no way that I can make that perfectly smooth on the bandsaw. This extra that I've left leaves me room to sand it down to the line. Depending on if it's straight or flat or curved, I'll use a different sander. But now I can sand it to the line without all of these little notches and things that look bad, these little burns, because whenever I'm turning, you're pinching the blade just a little bit, of course, because the blade is flat and I'm wanting it to turn. Now that the cutting is finished, when is it okay to remove these pieces of wood, this scrap? You may have noticed that while I was cutting, I did not reach in immediately to get them out. At the very least, use a board to push them out if it's running. But if these are close to the blade, shut off the blade, let it stop, and then grab your pieces and throw them away. We want to stay at least 2 inches away from the blade, 2 inches in all directions. So that has to do with any fingers in line with the blade. I may start with my finger in line, but once I get close to that 2 inches, you need to have them out of line of the blade. So there's no chance that anything is going in that you don't want to be cut. On a bandsaw, the most common accident that we see in our shops are students going too quickly. You're trying to cut too fast, which usually will leave one of your fingers in line with the blade because you're not thinking about it. So slow down. Also, making a cut and then stopping and twisting it to try to change direction will put a twist in the blade, as I mentioned before. Putting that tension on a blade could break it. They do break over time, the fatigue, and then eventually they snap. And once in a while, I've seen blades that will come around, it snaps, hits the table, and will shoot off one direction or another. So, should a blade break, should anything happen or go wrong, or a sound you're not accustomed to, you don't want to hear, get your hands out of the way, away from the blade, and then turn off the machine. So step away. Don't try to catch anything. Don't try to save your board. You can always make another one. Turn off the machine and keep your hands safe.